the 18th talk and 18th talk. You've got to leave Sandy to last, or in other words, this is the time she demanded to speak. So over, over to Sandy to bring our conference to a close for today. So enjoy your time, Sandy.
So, hello everyone, and if you've been here all day, well done. I've been teaching all day, so that is my excuse. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the Director of Studies at International House Bydgoszcz, which is in Poland. Don't try and pronounce it if you haven't tried before. It's not as hard as it looks, but no. Most people get put off by all the S's and Z's and things at the end. And I work mostly with teachers who are in their first or second year of teaching, and they've done a CELTA. They've spent hours and hours planning 6 lessons or 8 lessons, 6 hours of lessons. They've done loads of cutting up. They've done all singing, all dancing lessons, and then they come to our school and they've got to do that again and again and again without really time to do it, and then they kind of super stress themselves out because they want to be able to produce these all singing, all dancing lessons without actually really having time to do it. And this is something that I remember from the beginning of my career, just chatting to Sean about, that I started out in Brno, and I remember doing the same thing. And in fact, my best friend came to visit me once, and before we were allowed to go out to explore the city, she had to help me cut up various bits of paper for my lessons. Nowadays, I almost never cut up paper, and I obviously plan much more efficiently, but how do you bridge that gap between the new teacher and the more experienced teacher? How do you reduce all of that time when you're prepping materials? How do you stop the panic because you can't finish everything on the page if you're working with a course book? And how can you exploit the page that you have in front of you without adding millions of extra activities? How can you get more from the same amount of materials instead of adding more materials? Also, how can you help your students to learn more and leave space for their ideas instead of over planning and doing all of the work for them? So that's kind of what the aim behind my presentation. So I'm going to show you 2 coursebook spreads. These are ones that I've picked out just because they're books that I'm familiar with and ones that we've used a lot. We'll look at one from elementary and then one from intermediate, and they're old editions, not the most recent editions. That's partly because we're not sure about the copyright. I don't intend to infringe copyright at all, but I need some materials to show you. Apologies if it's quite small, but hopefully when I'm talking you through what's there, you'll be able to see like how I approach thinking about a coursebook page. This is also not a I know that people don't like coursebooks sometimes, but a lot of us in language schools, that's what you're working with. So how do you approach it? The coursebook debate can go on in another time and place. Right, let me see. Okay, so just bear with me a second. So, the first... Oh, what happened there?
I'll try and upload the
My picture didn't appear, Sean.
For a moment, and I'll get slides put up for you.
I don't actually have a coursebook spread to show people. Yeah, that's fine. So the first page that will hopefully appear for you in a minute is a page from Speak Out Elementary, and it's a functional language page. So on the page you've got the title. It's from both of the units that I've picked are kind of towards the middle to the end of the book. It's a page which is titled Sorry I'm Late. So on there you can see some vocabulary that is problems that people are having, like my car broke down or I lost my keys. And then you have a kind of function section where people are apologizing. So there was a train delay and the employee has come in and now they are apologizing to their boss for being late. So they've got a little, here are some phrases that you can use, and then there's like a little kind of dialogue frame that they can use. And then you have a section which is about learning to tell a long story. So this is somebody talking about these problem situations that they've had. And that gives the students examples of stories and shows them connectors. And then there's a final speaking activity where they're telling a story about something that's gone wrong. About an important event or a situation. And there are kind of 4 big pictures as well. So there's like I don't know if we can...
it is, but it's a bit messy. Yeah.
Okay. That's fine. Well, hopefully I'll keep... can I share my screen? Is that possible? Okay, that's fine. That's fine. Don't worry. Yeah, so you've got 4 pictures for example, of a breakdown van, of a tree in a road, of a massive traffic jam, and then of bad weather in London, I think, in St Paul's Cathedral. So that's everything that's on the page. And quite often the phrase that you hear from people about something like speak out is it teaches itself, in inverted commas. Like I would say, if you have unlimited time, everything is there. You could work through the page from start to finish and the students would learn. But this is quite book bound. There isn't really any variety. And most importantly, for the length of our lessons, for example, there's probably far too much stuff there. So yeah, you could do every activity on the page, but whether the students actually learn that and remember it later is debatable. So the first thing that I do is think about how much time I have available. So our lessons, when we're working with a double page spread like this, they're normally 90 minutes, but we spend the first 10 minutes or so doing some form of warmer revision speaking activity, and then 5 to 10 minutes doing a homework check and dealing with problems from the homework, which means that realistically, to work with this double page spread, my students will have about 70 minutes. Yay! My students will have... Well, yeah. Yeah, that's fine, thank you. Just having that is useful so people know what I'm talking about. Yeah, so realistically, you're probably working for about 70 minutes with this page. But I think that there's easily like 2.5 to 3 hours worth of work there if you're exploiting it enough. So you need to prioritize. So the first question you want to ask yourself is what is the main aim of the lesson? What is most useful to my students? So I mentioned before that you've kind of got 3 areas that you can hit. You've got the vocabulary phrases, like I've lost my keys, that kind of thing. You've got the apologizing phrases, and then you've got this learning to tell a long story. So I would say that you pick either the apologies or learning to tell a story. I don't think you could fit both of those into 70 minutes and really do them justice. And you could choose for your students, or ideally you could ask them in the previous lesson or a couple of lessons before, what do you want to practice? For me, at elementary level, that your biggest aims are building the students' confidence rather than rushing through and finishing the book, getting everything done. So they need, within their lessons, they need lots of repetition, lots of practice, and lots of chances to use the language. So I don't know if we'll be able to go to the next slide. Will that work? Can I have another slide? So I'm going to focus on the apologies. We're not going to do telling a long story because I think for my elementary students in this case, I think that being able to apologise will be something that they can use in real life much more commonly. So for example, if they go travelling, they might be able to apologise when, if they're late to meet somebody, something like that. Telling a long story is a beautiful function, but this will be more useful to my students. So hopefully Sean might be able to show you another slide in a minute. Yeah, this one, yeah, thank you. You've got this topic. They're going to have apologies and maybe this vocabulary phrases. how can you engage the students with this topic? Can you put some suggestions in the chat box? What would you do right at the beginning of the lesson to engage them? How do you, why should they care about apologising to other people in elementary? Thank you, Abia. I was wondering if anyone was going to type anything. Dialogue. So what do you mean by dialogue, Skajanan? What would you actually do? What would your activity be? Okay, yeah, so personalising it. Think of a situation when they said sorry, yeah. Again, Korean, what do you mean by social function of apologising? Like you're in an elementary class, what is your activity? What are you actually doing with them? Yeah, who do they say sorry to? Yeah. And as Emma said, authentic situations when they would be familiar with in L1. So so yeah, these real situations. Yeah, okay. Role playing. So this is a nice task-based thing. You're getting them to do the apology before you've taught them the language. Yeah. I think, Abir, yeah, it's fair to say you can go simple, but that doesn't mean that they can't have a go at doing the task beforehand. Yeah. Sorry, Cora. That's all right. I also think my question wasn't particularly clear, so that's also my fault. Poor teaching. But yeah, so I think this idea of either personalising it, when do you say sorry, thinking of the situations, or getting them to have a go. Those are both really good places to start. And that already tells you something about what they can do and what they need to know. So then you can find out already if they've had a go at the phrase. You can find out whether they need the vocabulary in the lesson. Are they producing phrases like I've lost my keys, or they're trying to say keys gone, keys, no keys, you know, this kind of thing. And you can decide whether you're going to do the vocabulary in the lesson with them. Apart from that, you can then go into the function section. You have this image of, like, I don't think that image will necessarily generate much conversation, but the actual story about train delays, I can't read it, it's so tiny, sorry. But basically the train was delayed, and that meant that the person was like an hour late into work, I think it was. So that's like a nice story to set up the situation, and that could give you your role play that they're going to have a go at. So your train was late, you come to work, apologise to your boss. Yeah, and that's a really nice starting point for your lesson. Get them communicating right from the beginning of the lesson. And that's one of my teachers said to me, I never thought this, if they start speaking at the beginning of the lesson, they're much more likely to speak all the way through the rest of the lesson. If they don't speak for the first 5 or 10 minutes, then quite often they're much quieter in the rest of the lesson. So speaking right from the very beginning. And then, yeah, so you've set up a context, they've had a go at the activity, and then you can feed in the phrases in 4A, 4B, 4C. Yeah, so starting from the communication, notice the gap, and then use that to help you decide how much you need to teach later. In terms of minimal preparation, I haven't created any extra materials for this. I've just exploited the materials in a different way, but I've been able to find out much more about what the students already know. The only materials you need are maybe 1 or 2 images, and you can use the images from the page that the students can use to prompt the role play. Yeah, you could also use those 4 pictures that are in the bottom right hand corner of this slide, but they just cover the phrases from the rest of the page. So who's apologising, where, why, for example. You can keep all of the students, you can build up a dialogue from one of these phrases onto the board, and that will keep more of the students engaged. It's although that can be quite teacher centred. They could write out their role play and in pairs, and you can go around feeding in extra language. If you're less confident as a teacher, you could just work through 4A, 4B, 4C as is, so that gives them the meaning and the form of the phrases. And then there's some extra practice in the language bank if they need it. But we've got phrases, we've got meaning, we've got form. What's missing? What have they not had practice of? Can you put it in the chat box? That's it, exactly. There's no pronunciation on this page. There's no explicit pronunciation activity. So you need to add in pronunciation, because if they're going to do a speaking activity, they need to have practiced speaking the phrases, not just reading them. So what pronunciation is good for the pronunciation. How do you say these phrases? What else is a pronunciation stage useful for in a functional language lesson? Why are you doing a pronunciation activity? How does it help the students? Okay, so intonation is an aspect of pronunciation, but what does drilling the phrases help the students to do? Okay, those are aspects of pronunciation. Yeah, memory. So if we want them to produce it freely in the speaking, we need them to have had a chance to memorize the phrases at all. Sorry, I'm very tired. My English isn't great right now. They need to have had a chance to memorize the phrases, because otherwise when they get to the speaking, the phrases won't be there ready for them to pull out. So you can minimal prep drilling activities, a keyword drill. So you put a keyword on there, like sorry, the slides are so small I can't read it. So you can put on there like really, and that prompts, look, I'm really sorry I'm late, or terribly, I'm terribly sorry I'm late, or feel, I feel terrible about it, or afraid, I'm afraid my train hit a cow. Those are the phrases that they've got in there. So on the board you put afraid, terrible, horrible, and I can't remember what the other word I said was. You put those on the board and the students have to try and remember the phrases. You don't need to prepare anything before the lesson, and that activity can take 5 or 10 minutes. It increases their confidence, it gives them the pronunciation, and you can decide in the lesson, you can be flexible and respond to the students' needs. So again, you don't need to prepare extra materials. They've had practice of the phrases. You can go back then to the book and they can have a go with the conversation. They have the conversation framework there. You do not need to prepare anything else. It's already in your book. And then you also then have in 5B, you have different situations, a student, a teacher, a friend, a child, a parent. You can ask them to come up, you can give them a couple of examples, like we've had a boss, an employee, and a student, a teacher, and they can think of other pairs of people who might apologise to each other, and then they then come up with their own conversations where they're apologising and using these phrases. If they haven't moved at all in this lesson, which at this point in the way that I've planned it, they haven't, get them standing up and have these conversations with different people around the room. Or they can do 5B and 5C as is. So they are, for example, a student and a teacher, and they have a conversation, and somebody else listens, and they have to guess what roles they're playing. Oh, you're a student, you're a teacher, this kind of roles. So I've taken part of what's in the book, I've added some extra things, and I've given the students more repetition, more practice, more time, and that will probably be about 65 minutes, and then that gives me 5 minutes at the end. Can you remember all of the phrases, or repeat, or very importantly, feedback on what they've done. You know, do you feel more confident with apologizing now, for example? So so instead of can I get my next slides, Sean? I don't know if that will work. That might work with the actual slides at this point. Maybe. Let's see. That may work with the slides, because I think without the screenshot. Sean. My slides are still behind, I think. You've got a new slide size. Okay. Yeah, is that so? Can you see? So hopefully everyone can see. How can we do these pages? Yeah. Can you tell me if you can see those slides all right? Yeah. Okay. So rather than starting with I've got 2 pages which I must work my way through, we can ask ourselves a different set of questions, which are what do my students need the most from this page or from this unit? or preferably you've already asked them what do they want to do. What do they already know? So that was the little test thing that we did at the beginning. Like, are they already producing phrases like I've lost my keys, or are they saying like no keys? So that's the vocabulary side of it. Or with the functional language, are they saying I sorry? Or are they saying things like, I'm terribly sorry? At elementary, I'd be impressed if they could do that. So you're kind of doing some form of diagnosis with them. And which activity are you going to do that diagnosis? How much time do they realistically need to bridge the gap between what they can already do here and where they need to be here? How much time is it going to take to get between those two things? And making sure you give them time to do it, not rush through what's on the page or in the book. How can you maximize engagement? How can you get them to care about the topic? How can you add variety? How can you just keep them interested throughout? So it's not just let's do exercise 2, let's do exercise 3. It's an important question to ask yourself. And then in terms of the minimal prep thing, what can the book already do? Like, most of what I just told you was already in the book in some form, but I'm just using it perhaps in a slightly different way to how it was intended from the book. And then what's missing? So in this case, for example, we had that the pronunciation was missing, the memorization was missing. So I need to add those things. And the initial task, it had vocabulary, but it didn't really kind of get them into the topic necessarily. So I needed to add something at the beginning to engage them in it. But I've picked tasks that don't require me to create loads of cut-ups or to create an all singing, all dancing PowerPoint presentation. I picked something where I need to write 4 words on the board and ask them a question. Minimal preparation. And then once you've got your whole lesson plan, or while you're doing it, how much variety is there, or how much variety is needed? How can I add it? So variety can be interaction patterns. It can be like heads up, heads down, the other way around, heads up, heads down. It can be using the book, not using the book. It can be working with one partner and then a different partner. It can be variety in feedback, so it's not just all open class feedback, but sometimes the students are finding a new partner, or sometimes you're giving them you're displaying the answers for them to look at. Think about where the variety can be in your lesson. And particularly with adults, we forget this quite often. Where is the movement going to be? That's something that Farry was just talking about as well. Is there going to be some movement within my lesson, and how can I add it? So there is not time for me to go through the second one, but what you'll see on my blog in the next 40 minutes, because I haven't quite finished writing the blog post yet, will be some ideas for how you could do the same thing with the intermediate coursebook page here. And so asking yourself those questions that I mentioned before will hopefully help you to approach the book in a different way, and move away from that. Sorry, I'm skipping through everything now. Move away from that idea of how can I teach this page to how can I make it work for my students? How can I, but with minimal extra effort for myself. And just a very super quick plug at the end. You've got the link. This will be the link to the blog post in about 40 minutes. And I've also written some books, which you're welcome to please go and buy. They are reflective tasks. And actually in ELT Playbook 1, the blue one on the left, for example, there's one task which is about how to exploit material, how to exploit a single activity. So how many ideas can you think of for using a single activity? And part of the idea is that people will share these ways of using a single activity, maybe as a blog or a video, and other people can learn from it. They can click on the link, but I haven't actually written the blog post yet, Sean, so it won't go anywhere right now. In about 40 minutes it will, sorry. So apologies for the slight hiccups in that presentation, but hopefully you've learnt something from it and it was useful for you. And a couple of days ago I shared a post on my blog which is 101 ways to exploit a coursebook page. So if you haven't got enough from this presentation, you will be able to get them from that. And if you give me 10 seconds, I will actually give the direct link to that in the chat box, and that link does work. And so that gives you, that gives you lots of different ideas.
Why don't they stop at 100? Why 101? What is it about 101 that does it? But thank you very much for the session. And sorry, but I have no idea what happened with the images, because they should have appeared in it. I can't see the reason why they wouldn't. But I don't think it impacted upon the session too much. So thank you all.